Joe Barger's gut screamed danger that night in Michigan's Manistee National Forest. 15 seconds, that's all it took. 15 seconds to obliterate the boundary between possible and impossible. 15 seconds to cleave his existence, before and after. One moment an average trucker, the next witness to abomination. The wrench slipped. Metal kissed metal with a sound that violated the unnatural stillness. Joe's curse died in his throat, swallowed by silence that pressed against his eardrums like deep water. Copper flooded his mouth. This wasn't quiet. This was wrong. Joe had mastered practical dismissal of woodland oddities, the peripheral movements, inexplicable murmurs. But this wrongness saturated his senses with unbearable density. Something primal recognized the threat before conscious thought could form. June 2017. The Manistee forest should have pulsed with twilight life. Instead, a vacuum pressed against Joe's skull. His breathing became obscene in the void, each exhalation a trespass against something ancient and watchful. 20 years hunting these woods had taught him the language of danger, that electric crawl across his scalp, that hollow behind his sternum, that voice at the base of his skull screaming run. Under his semi repairing an airline, Joe felt darkness gathering 20 yards away. Not shadow, something that consumed light. 20 years he'd hunted these woods. His body recognized danger before his mind could name it. That electric prickle across his scalp, that hollow feeling behind his sternum, that voice at the base of his skull screaming run, run, fucking run. He was under the belly of his semi, a routine 20-minute airline repair turning into something else. He felt it in his gut, a primal unease that prickled his skin, even before he saw the darkness gathering 20 yards away, deeper in the trees. It wasn't just shadow. This wasn't the first time Joe had felt this kind of wrongness in the woods. A childhood encounter with a Bigfoot, a hulking shape glimpsed in the periphery, had left an indelible mark. It was a feeling he'd tried to bury, to dismiss as a kid's overactive imagination, but it had resurfaced now and again. The crimson sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in warning colors that matched the knot forming in Joe's gut. Flat on his back, shoulder blades digging into cool Michigan soil, he stared up at the undercarriage of his semi. The truck loomed above him like a sleeping beast, 43,000 pounds of paper from Traverse City strapped to its back. Sweat trickled down his temple despite the evening chill. Something primal itched at the base of his skull, a sensation he hadn't felt since his army days, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Just fix the damn line and get back on the road. His calloused fingers worked the small crack near the back brake chamber, muscle memory taking over while his mind cataloged everything wrong with the moment. The snowplow turnaround where he'd pulled off, just wide enough for his rig without blocking the two-lane highway, suddenly felt obscenely exposed, vulnerable. It began with absence, not what he heard, but what had been extinguished. Silence has density, texture. The silence enveloping Joe now had mass. It occupied space, displaced air, generated gravity. Predatory silence, the silence before the strike. A sound penetrated the vacuum, small branches fracturing 30 yards into the tree line. A tremor broke the silence, twigs snapping in the tree line. Joe's hands froze mid-repair, his pulse hammered against stillness. Then it came, not sound, but invasion. The vibration bypassed his ears entirely, embedding directly in his chest cavity. A wolf's snarl played backward through shattered speakers, modulated with calculated precision, not animal vocalization, a weaponized frequency designed by something that understood the architecture of human terror. His grandfather's warnings crystallized. Places in these woods where nature fractured, where trees grew against their design, where explanations withered and died. Reality thinned here, always had. Joe's fingers accelerated on the repair, muscle memory outpacing conscious thought. Finish it. Seal yourself away. Escape. Dismissing the memories, Joe refocused on his repair, fingers moving faster now. The crack was minor. This was black bear country. Speed was prudent anyway. 5 minutes. Just 5 more minutes and he'd be sealed inside his cab, safe behind glass and steel. The forest seemed to inhale. Complete silence dropped like a blade. Joe's ears popped with the sudden pressure change. The space between heartbeats stretched impossible seconds. Sweat froze on his skin despite the June warmth. Something ancient within him, older than language, older than thought, screamed a single command. Run. One fluid movement took him from beneath the truck. The repair would hold, had to. The cab door handle was slick under his palm, the diesel engine vibration traveling through his boots when he turned the key. The diesel engine rumbled to life, vibrating through the floorboards. Gauges showed pressure holding. Good enough. His eyes flickered to the empty road. Not a single vehicle had passed during his stop. Strange for this time of evening, even on this remote stretch. As the truck inched forward, fighting gravity on the incline, Joe felt a weight lift from his chest. Maybe he'd overreacted. Maybe... The light in his passenger side mirror vanished. A split second of confusion, then instinct jerked his head toward the open window. The world tilted, reality cracking along fault lines Joe never knew existed. It filled his entire window frame. A face like a wolf's but wrong, proportions deliberately distorted, features sculpted with intention. Awareness burned behind its construction. This wasn't an animal face, but something wearing an animal's features, a sophisticated forgery. The creature ran alongside his truck on two legs at a leisurely trot. The speedometer read 25 miles per hour. Joe's mind tried to process what his eyes reported. The creature towered a full foot above his cab, 9 feet above the ground, broad shoulders beneath black fur, arms hanging wrong, too long, ending in hands neither paw nor human, but functional hybrids of both. Time slowed to molasses. It lifted its left arm. Claws appeared on the window's edge, scoring paint and rubber with deliberate pressure. Testing. The window is open. The realization detonated in his consciousness, sending his hand fumbling for the switch. The glass began to rise with excruciating slowness. Then came the twin realizations. Too slow, too late. It wouldn't matter. This was not hyperbole, but a desperate understatement. An attempt to compress the unthinkable into something remotely comprehensible. The creature's skull alone dwarfed full-grown German shepherds, its neck as thick as Joe's torso. This was a biological impossibility, a thing that mocked the very principles of vertebrate anatomy. Something that massive should not move with such fluid, predatory grace. Its head alone was an abomination of sheer scale, a black-furred nightmare that could fill a laundry basket. Behind its gleaming, impossibly pristine teeth, a tongue as broad as a cow's glistened wetly. Its hands, if they could be called that, defied categorization, neither paw nor human palm, but an unholy fusion of both. The fingers stretched 8 to 10 inches, their tips armed with polished obsidian spikes, meant for casual butchery. And when the full form was finally revealed, tumbling down the embankment, it was undeniable. This thing carried the mass of a horse, easily 1,000 pounds of impossible muscle and predatory intent. The mundane comparison trapped reality in Joe's throat. Black mane flowing from pointed ears, thick with silvery, translucent tips catching dying light. Face resembling a German shepherd but compressed, more expressive. Entirely black except for 2 features, those teeth. Jesus Christ. Brilliant white, like it never missed a dentist appointment white. Thick as Joe's thumb and 3 to 4 inches long, tapering to steel puncturing points. A scar traced its muzzle, pale tissue against black fur. And the eyes, amber, yellow, burning with an intelligence that didn't belong in an animal face. They darted, calculating, assessing, not with predatory instinct, but with strategy. They moved from the truck to the road to Joe's face, and when they locked with his own, something impossible happened. A message, silent yet unmistakable, unfolded in Joe's mind, not heard but felt. A cold, invasive certainty pressed into his thoughts.
I gotcha, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Not words, pure intent, smugness wrapped in ancient hunger. It invaded his mind, not to communicate but to dominate. He felt its predatory amusement, its certainty of dominance, its desire to force him to know his utter helplessness. Joe's subconscious replied before conscious thought formed.
You think I can't do anything about it? Watch this.
Time compressed. 20 years of weekend marksmanship, 6 years of military muscle memory, pure survival instinct, one fluid motion. His hand moved to the space between seat and cooler, to the Smith & Wesson Governor Form 410. This wasn't conscious decision-making. It was the culmination of thousands of hours of practice, of daily drills pulling his weapon from concealment, acquiring targets in fractions of seconds. Every morning before his routes, Joe practiced this exact motion until it resided in his spine rather than his mind. The military had forged this reflex. His own discipline had honed it to lethal precision. The creature's expression changed. Recognition, surprise. 2 shots exploded in the confined cab. Solid copper, hollow point, maximum expansion rounds designed to open into 1.5-inch spinning blades on impact. Grizzly killers. One found its mark through eye socket or temple. The creature went instantly rigid, as if slamming into an invisible wall. Joe's ears rang with concussive force. His hands operated the truck automatically, eyes fixed on the side mirror. Dust erupted where the creature hit gravel. Arms and legs stiffened in the distinctive neural shutdown pattern of a brain shot. It mowed down weeds as momentum carried it down the embankment. For the first time, Joe saw its full form. Horse massive, limbs thick as his waist, a human-like torso with 5-foot tail. Dinner plate paws. He kept driving, but a new compulsion seized him, the hunter's need for confirmation. He had to see. He had to know that it was dead. The alternative was unthinkable. He couldn't live knowing that thing still walked the earth, that it might come for him again, or for someone else, someone unprepared. At the hill's crest, a small picnic area offered barely enough space to maneuver. He sacrificed a few small tree limbs in his desperate turn, the semi grinding and protesting as he forced it around in a space never meant for such a vehicle. 5 agonizing minutes later, he headed back down toward the encounter site. The spot was unmistakable, impact path carved through weeds, but the massive black form was gone. Instead, a white Jeep with government plates idled roadside. A couple stood beside it, postures unnaturally rigid as they surveyed the disturbance.
Need any help?
Joe called, masking vocal tremor. Their response came too quickly.
No, we're fine. We just stopped because we thought we saw a couple of really big bears or something fighting, and one dragging the other into the woods.
Joe's gaze followed theirs to where a clear path had been trampled through undergrowth. Something heavy dragged away. Their eyes held the same fracture Joe recognized in his own. People who'd glimpsed something that shattered their reality. The knowledge passed between them unspoken.
So you saw 2 of them?
The question slipped out before Joe could stop it.
Yeah.
They answered in unison too hastily.
Good God, there's more than one? A pack?
The conversation died in strained pleasantries. As Joe pulled away, he noticed what they'd attempted to conceal. A shotgun propped against the Jeep's back seat, primed for immediate use. The drive home passed in adrenaline crashes and hypervigilance spikes. Every shadow transformed into lurking figures, every reflection a pair of amber eyes. He kept thinking it had to have been divine intervention guiding his hand. If he'd stopped to think, to hesitate for even a second, all that would remain of Joe Barger would be an empty truck on a lonely stretch of Michigan highway. He'd faced combat. Looked down the barrels too had not taken him when he was at his most vulnerable, lying beneath the truck. He'd seen it, he realized, recognized the disturbance in light and shadow for what it was, but his mind had refused to process the impossible. But this wasn't his first confrontation with the inexplicable. In Louisiana during his army days, he'd stood with 4 fellow soldiers as an 8-foot Bigfoot emerged from the tree line 40 feet away. In Alaska, he'd been summoned by his commanding officer to view something inconceivable, a massive blonde-furred humanoid corpse guarded like nuclear material after military forces had killed it. Over Lake Huron during pilot training, he'd witnessed glowing objects beneath the water's surface, moving with impossible trajectories. The Dogman was merely the first time the impossible had directly threatened his existence rather than merely his sanity. The following weeks blurred together. He moved through life like a ghost, going through motions while his mind continuously replayed those 15 seconds. Sleep became a battlefield. The creature's eyes appeared in dreams, its message repeating,
I gotcha. Nothing you can do.
He had done something. He'd fought back, survived. For nearly a year, he carried the encounter alone, its weight hollowing him from inside. The woods, once sanctuary, became dread territory. How could he return to hunting, knowing what shared those spaces? How sit at dawn, potential prey? Another year passed before he contacted Lance Hightower of Cryptid Brothers Investigations, appearing on the Monster 911 podcast. Not fully public, but unburdening. That's when reality twisted again. The scale house should have been routine, weigh in, credentials check, move on. Instead,
Get comfortable. The feds want to talk to you.
Hours later, a black sedan with white government plates, identical to the Jeep from that night, pulled up. Two men in dark suits emerged, controlled fury in their movements. Badges flashed too quickly for identification. Their first words crushed any doubt about why they'd come.
You killed our asset.
The accusation landed with cold precision, devoid of the expected disbelief or confusion. The agent hadn't questioned whether Joe had encountered something impossible, only that he'd destroyed government property. The acknowledgement carried more terror than the creature itself. They knew. They had always known. The statement hung in the air between them, impossible and yet horrifyingly confirmed. Their anger wasn't at the existence of the creature. They knew. They were angry that Joe had destroyed something they considered theirs.
That thing was your asset? And now you're mad because I killed it?
Absurdity would have provoked laughter if terror hadn't frozen his vocal cords. They'd heard the podcast. These men weren't here to validate his experience. They were damage control. Their threats came wrapped in bureaucratic precision. Drug tests could be manipulated, banking records altered, licenses revoked. They knew about his concealed carry permit, about the weapon he'd used.
We need your gun and your phone.
Days later, his bank accounts froze. Not permanently, just long enough to send a message. These people could reach into any corner of his life. They held power he couldn't fight. Joe complied, for a while. But silence has its half-life. As months passed, fear's edges dulled enough for clarity. These creatures existed. People deserved warning, needed protection. Each sleepless night reinforced growing conviction. Experience carried obligation. He started speaking again. He accepted that many would dismiss him as delusional or attention-seeking. He didn't care anymore. If his story reached just one person, gave them that critical second of recognition that might save their life, it was worth the ridicule, worth the risk. Questions plague him. How many share the forests? What consumption sustained such mass? Where had the body gone? Too heavy for humans to move quickly. If its kind retrieved it, organizational ability, pack behavior, intelligence more terrifying than physical encounter. One thought persists. Nagging suspicion that the creature wasn't the threat, but distraction. Classic military tactic. Attention right, attack left. He never saw anything approach his left side. The federal agents? They maintained their surveillance. A tracker appeared on his vehicle once. And 5 years after they'd confiscated his weapon, Joe discovered an unfamiliar box in the back of his pickup. Under the locked tonneau cover he alone had keys for. Inside, his gun, returned without explanation or fingerprints. A precision-calibrated message. We can access your most private spaces anytime. We're still watching. The violation struck deeper than mere intimidation. It was existential. No locks, no precautions, no sanctuary remained uncompromised. But Joe has decided some truths outweigh safety. He's finished with shadows, with fear-enforced silence. His encounter, 20 seconds that rewrote reality, changed everything. The creature's amber eyes still dissect his sleep, but Joe no longer averts his gaze. Without military reflexes, his truck would have been found empty, engine running, door open, another disappearance reduced to police shorthand. The Joe Barger who pulled into that snowplow turnaround evaporated there. He was now a man with senses sharpened to perceive a reality hidden from others. For weeks he moved through a world he no longer recognized. Every surface and interaction a potential threat. Sleep became combat territory. Those 20 seconds replaying with surgical precision, each iteration revealing details his consciousness initially quarantined. Now silence triggers an autonomic cascade. When insects abruptly cease their chorus, his hand finds the weapon before conscious thought forms. Michigan's northern routes have transformed into tactical problems requiring perpetual calculation. Windows sealed, governor close at hand, eyes mechanically cataloging mirrors, shadows, movements at visual periphery. He wonders what other entities occupy government asset registries, and how far up this goes. He doubts he will ever have answers, though. JFK died 60 years ago, and the truth remains classified. If the government withholds information about what we know, when will they acknowledge what exists beyond our comprehension? Some nights, when sleep refuses, Joe sits on his porch staring into darkness beyond property lines. He listens to insect chorus, to familiar night patterns. And when those sounds stop, when silence drops like a blade, his hand moves instinctively to the weapon at his side. He will not be silent. He will be ready. Through his words, perhaps others will be also. Because in Manistee National Forest, perhaps in forests everywhere, something waits in silence, something watching, something hunting. And sometimes when sunset bleeds warning across sky, crickets fall silent for a reason. If you have looked into the eyes of the impossible and lived to tell the tale, deadnetstudios wants to hear from you. Share your story at deadnetstudios@gmail.com, and together, let us explore the darkness, giving voice to the silenced and shedding light on the mysteries that haunt our world. Some experiences leave wounds that never fully heal. Some stories carve themselves into bone and blood, reshaping everything after. Some truths, dangerous as they may be, must find their way into light.
In the shadows of the digital night, we wandered far and seen some sights, from haunting tales to eerie lights. Deadnet Studios where fear ignites. So long, farewell from the crimson hollows. We'll be back again with more tales to follow. Keep the lights dimmed and your curiosity high. For in Deadnet's realm, the spirits never die. We've danced with ghosts, chased legends on, through cryptid codes, stories untold. In cyberspace where mysteries unfold, our journey's been daring, brave and bold. So long, farewell from the darkened halls, where shadows whisper and the unknown calls. Keep your eyes wide and your mind astir, for the mysteries of Deadnet are a haunting blur. In the world of strange and the unexplained, we find our stories wildly untamed. With the studio's end, we take a little rest. We find the shadows every